Workshop at Authors Publish. I am very excited to be here today and to learn and to listen to Cat Rambo. We're just going to wait a couple minutes so that everybody who is here will have a chance to show up before we get started. So we'll just wait a couple minutes and then we're going to get going. If you're here, feel free to say hello in the chat. I always love seeing where our wonderful audience is located around the world and seeing your familiar names. I know a surprising amount of you. So yeah, wonderful to be here and wonderful to see your names. Hello, Rita and Barbara and Christina. Hello in Toronto. I'm in Toronto. Hello in Denver and Ridgefield, Washington, not far from where I grew up. Hello, everybody. Hello in Chicago and New York and Portugal. Wonderful part of the world
Oh,
there.
Costa Rica, one of my favorite places.
Portland and Baltimore. When I
Belgium.
was a few months old, I moved from Baltimore to Portland. Hello in Amsterdam and Victoria and Canada, Vancouver. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'm a big fan of Kat Rembo's writing, so I'm really excited that Kat um, came back to give another talk for us. So we're just going to wait one more minute before we get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and feel free to say hello in the chat. Yeah, hello in Belgium and San Antonio. We have a truly wonderful audience here today
Oh,
from all around the world. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for being here, and hello,
yes,
everybody.
Seattle, represent. Awesome.
Hello in Istanbul,
Ooh,
in Philadelphia. We have a lot of Turkish restaurants in our neighborhood. Hello in California, Alameda. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here.
yeah.
So I am going to um, pull up my notes and then we can get started. All right. Hello, writers. This is Jacob Jans with the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Kat Rambo, who will be giving a talk on the art of writing side characters that add depth and nuance to your story. This is part of our monthly lecture series where we host talks on the business of publishing and the craft of writing. Kat Rambo is a Nebula Award-winning author of science fiction and fantasy. Kat's book, You Sexy Thing, was published by Tor and is a wonderful read, actually, full of many delightful side characters. Kat's been very widely published in places such as Asimov's, Clark's World, and Tor.com. Kat was also a two-term president of the Science Fiction Writers Association. I'm very grateful to Kat Rambo for being here today. Welcome, Kat. How are you?
I'm doing well. And my gosh, it's so lovely to be here and feel all the virtual connections going out across the world. Um, I'm going to just dive into things because
Yeah,
always I have a lot to say. So this is a class that I ended up coming up with because there's a lot of advice about writing romances and love interests, but your protagonist has a lot of other kinds of relationships, and a lot of those other relationships are capable of driving the action. And human beings make connections all the time as they interact with the beings around them. And those relationships aren't static, but they're things that change and grow over time. And so thinking about those relationships will help you come up with richer characters and more interesting plots. You will find that new plot possibilities are provided by sibling rivalries or friends pitted against each other, intergenerational struggles, scheming employers, and other twists of fate. You want to think about it because your characters are built of relationships. How they conduct them reflects and shapes who they are, and their relationships in the past may well, probably will, affect their relationships in the future. This is also a really good place for thinking about subverting the traditional dynamics. Instead of a romantic relationship, what if those sparks lead to a lasting friendship or some sort of ongoing rivalry? And thinking about these relationships lets you create books about casts of characters rather than single protagonists. And this is if you have a novel of found family, if you have a novel with intergenerational legacies and struggles, you need to be thinking about those relationships. So your character, your main character, has a huge variety of different relationships. And I think it's useful to take a minute and just jot down all of the different kinds you can think of, both past and present ones. What friends do they have? Who do they interact with regularly? What's their family like? Are they in any economic relationships, such as employer, employee, landlord or tenant, clerk or customer? Do they have neighbors, mentors, competitors? And all of those relationships can provide fresh story fodder. So once you've taken a minute to kind of jot down all of those relationships and look at them, look and look at your list and say, does it include the relationships formed by work, including the people that they pay, such as the wait staff at the restaurant they eat at every day, or who pays them, such as a manager or employer? Who are the people they interact with on a regular basis just as a result of proximity, like their neighbors, like their mail carrier, like the storekeepers in their local area? And what ties are a result of their education, their teachers or fellow students or mentors? Who are the important people from their past? And which of them do they maintain ties with? And so when we're thinking about relationships, we're not thinking about erotic love. We're not talking about self-love, but we're talking about what the Greeks called, among some of the things that we're talking about, one is philia. And philia is deep friendship. It's a relationship that's intimate, that's authentic, it's filled with affection and fondness. And that's a sort of relationship that takes time and effort to build. Uh, Not an instantaneous relationship, and it's usually something that both sides of the relationship place a high value on. Agape is love for everyone. It's the sort of love that might motivate charitable work or self-sacrifice. It's a love based on empathy that extends outward without expecting love in return. Nuns and monks exhibit agape, as do the countless volunteers who keep various organizations going. Storge is unconditional family love, and it can certainly be mixed with other emotions in order to create complications. I have very complicated feelings about several of my relatives. It tends to be instinctual, like a parent's feeling for their child, and then influenced by history. And as we said, proximity creates relationships, and we are definitely usually in long proximity with our families. Pragma is committed, conscious love based on understanding and long-term best interests. And eros, which is erotic love, can become pragma over time. These are the sorts of couples that have spent a lifetime working on their relationship. Pragna is deliberate and aware. It's not an accidental relationship. And so it's useful sometimes to take a character and list one example of each kind of, of love in their life. And kind of, some may be past relationships, some may be current. Are there any that are lacking in their lives? Are there relationships that they're pursuing? Are there any relationships that are pursuing them, but there's unwanted? So, in the course of trying to think about this, let me take a copy. I have 5 different ways people sort of analyze interactions that you can use when you're working with characters. Uh, Agape. I'm not. I'm not. I just. There you go. Thank you, Jacob. I am not. I like to read, so I and I did a lot of research for this class. So there's 5 ways that kind of like with pop psychology that people think about interactions between characters. What I'm going to do, Teresa, is I'm going to put some notes up online, and I will mention the site that I'll stick them up on within the next day or so. I want to see kind of how far I get before I flesh those out. So one style of looking at people is transactional analysis, created by Eric Byrne. which basically uses the transaction as a basic analogy. One person gives another person a piece of attention and receives another in return. And so if that original piece was negative, then they'll probably get a negative piece back. While if the initial interaction is positive, usually the return is positive. And you can go and test this on your daily walk and just try with one person smiling and saying good morning in a sincere tone and see what kind of reaction you get. And then with the next person, if you feel like it, mutter at them, "Oh, good morning," and see what kind of response you get, right? That one's positive and one's negative. And so you want to think about your character. Are they starting interchanges on a positive or negative note? How do they react to people giving them bad attitudes? Okay, so this is one way to think about people communicating with each other. Yes, dog walker culture. Everybody's friend. Also, cigarette smokers, people hanging out by the hotel lobby smoking. Everybody's friendly there, I have found. I don't smoke anymore, but I do miss the companionship. Have to find it other ways. All right, so I said transactional analysis. Let me stick that in the chat. Yeah, Reblin's mentioning that in Smile in Germany, people will look at you weirdly, whereas if in your Barbados, people will look at you weirdly if you aren't friendly. So that's definitely a cultural thing. So another thing is satir modes, which is by Virginia Satir, and that describes communication styles. And it maintains that people tend to communicate in one of five modes when they are stressed or feel threatened, each of which has a distinctive style. Oh yeah, TA, I remember the TA books. We had them at my house too. So your five groups are blamers. Blamers do not accept responsibility for their behavior. They blame it on somebody else. You got placaters who only want to please and get approval and avoid conflict at all costs. You've got computers who will avoid all emotion and rely on logic. You've got distractors who will use a range of emotions to try and remove attention from whatever is being discussed. And you have levelers who try to communicate in order to solve the problem. And so, like, if we had a spaceship crash, the blamer might be like, "Oh, who pushed me? I accidentally pushed the button that crashed the ship. Oh, you guys let things get so chaotic. It's a wonder we didn't crash 10 solars ago." Nope, Walter, I don't have slides. Sorry. Placater might say, "Oh, I'm sure we'll all calm down. And if we all calm down and stop shouting, we can get to where we all feel better about what's going on." A computer person might be, "Well, the ship was bound to crash because we encountered an asteroid. There was a 54% chance that would happen." Distractor might be like, "I'll go make some tea and we'll think about the fact that the ship is crashing, but maybe let's talk about the birthday party I meant to be giving last week." And then the leveler might be like, "I'll activate the shields to cushion our fall. You go jettison some cargo." And yep, all of those are modes that certainly people can mix, right? People can go in a whole variety of styles, but people tend to revert to a particular one when they're stressed. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to put characters in stress. And it's kind of handy to know what they're going to do. It's also, I think this is a fun exercise to do if you try to write a crisis scene with three different characters, each of which goes to a completely different way. That is satir mode. Okay. Another way of sorting people is introvert versus extrovert. Are these people introverts or are they extroverts? And that's not an absolute category, right? There are two ends of the spectrum. And more people than most, I think, tend to be towards the middle, right, than one or the other. And so you want to think about how are introverts interacting with extroverts and vice versa. Oh yeah, Sue is asking why we need stressed characters. Yeah, because you want to be mean and awful to your characters because characters who are having a pleasant life are not a particularly interesting read. The Three Little Pigs would not be interesting if the wolf was not there threatening to eat them. I mean, it might be, I mean, like cozy fantasy is lower stakes. But most of the time, you want to put your characters through a lot because then when it gets to the other side and they're kind of being rewarded for things, then you feel like they earned it and you feel happier for them. Okay. All right. Um, you might also want to think of your characters and their interactions in terms of their love language, right? That kind of got into pop psychology a way back. And this is how people, a theory that sorts people by how they express love. So the categories are words of affirmation, right? Saying supportive things. They're acts of service. They might be, I saw a video lately of a bunch of friends that went over to help a mother that had just given birth by cleaning her house, right? So acts of service. Gifts are another way people express themselves. Quality time, and then physical touch. And I'm sticking those in the chat. And that's going to be interesting because one of the things that can really be a conflict between people is if they don't understand each other's love languages. Think about that moment in The Princess Bride where Wesley says, as you wish, and she finally understands that what he's saying then is, I love you, right? It is an act of, he is a service-oriented person. I don't know about attachment styles. I will certainly look them up for next time I uh, do a class on this because I'm always looking for more stuff. Oh, absolutely. You can have characters who are not what they seem. You can have characters who present a certain face in order to deceive or possess something that's not theirs. Yeah, that's absolutely one of the plays you could have. And I think that can be really interesting because you can make that character slip up periodically, right? You could have that kind of the true face show through. Okay. So one other way of sorting people that people have used is family placement. And this is a theory that like oldest children tend to be more responsibility oriented. Youngest children tend to be rely on charm and be more impulsive and whimsical. And I think this is one of the things that you're going to want to think about with your character is who are their siblings? Who are their aunts and uncles? Who's alive? Who's dead? Who are they attached to? Who have they gone non-contact with? Yeah, you absolutely could do this with any personality aspect. Astrology, Myers-Briggs, Enneagrams. But this is the sort of thing that helps you create characters that are distinctive from each other. You don't want characters that are all exactly the same. You want characters that do use different communication styles and that have a conflict as a result of that. I don't know because you're not explaining what they're doing. You're just using it to shape what they're doing. I'm answering Rose's question. Don't you run the risk of adding so much detail that you bog down the story? Which is a great question. Yeah, if you explained it all, but no, just have it shape their actions, have it shape what they do. This is one of the reasons why it's a good idea to daydream about characters. A great idea to just spend some time staring off in the distance and actually working pretty hard. Middle children tend to be, they're more adaptable, patient. They tend to work well with others. There's a lot of great stuff on this. And so it's worth taking a look at. If any of these appeal to you, go and unpack them a little more. Okay, so that's some ways of sorting people. So let's think about friendships. And friendships are relationships of sympathy. They're relations of sympathy and interest with another being. They often develop out of shared experiences and proximity. Friendships usually have a history, a progression over time that can sometimes account for long lapses in contact. There's people that I feel immediately comfortable with even when I haven't seen them in a long, long time, right? Friends from grade school or such. You can have friendships that arise quickly and others that take a long time to build. Friends can be a resource for the character, or they can be a source of complications, perils, and betrayals. And so you might want to sort your character's friends on a sort of continuum of intimacy, right? Who are the acquaintances, right? Who are the people that they've met enough times that they recognize them, but they don't know a lot else other than their name? Who are the casual friends that they've spent a little bit of time with and they know kind of the basic facts about who they are. And then you've got close friends, right? People you've spent a lot of good time with. And then you've got intimate friends, someone that you've shared secrets or other intimate details with. And if your character has close and intimate friendships, you want to remember those friendships are built out of moments of intimacy, moments where the other person has been seen and recognized, both at their best and at their worst. And these are often moments of high trauma, danger and other intensity, right? We talked about people go to certain reactions in stress, right? Moments of high trauma and danger are often where people reveal who they are and what they are and aren't capable of. And so sharing those moments helps build a friendship. And remember that friendships aren't always made up of a duo, right? They can be groups, particularly if you're working with narratives of found family or other things like, I don't know, a spaceship crew, something like that. You can have past and future lovers, right? Sometimes they're in the friend zone, and sometimes you can have friends with benefits, right? That have physical intimacy without a romantic relationship. And so some of the questions you want to ask about friend relationships. One is, where and when did the friendship begin? And what are the moments that have made it move from one category to another, like acquaintance to casual friend, or intimate, deep friend to intimate friend? You want to you want to ask, where did the time spent together? What are the shared experiences? What are the things that helped create that friendship? One thing that's fun to think about are, what are the layers of in-jokes and common references? Something absolutely crucial to think about is the degree of trust. How much trust exists in the friendship? And what are the moments that have either built or destroyed that trust? And finally, how much validation do they give each other? And is that, by validation, I mean that, seeing somebody else and saying, yeah, you're okay. That's validation. So do they give that validation to each other in some way? And is it conditional in any way, right? Are they going to withhold that validation if the friend doesn't please them enough? Yeah, Dusty's mentioned writing a story where a woman has close friends in music because they're other musicians, because they also helped her through her journey in the music world. Yeah, friends and frenemies and teachers and lovers, mentees and mentors. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So it's sometimes useful to identify all the kind of deep friendships in your character's life, and they can be past, they can be present. And if they're past, kind of like what happened to them. You want to think about friendships as being made up of four different components. And that first component is, in fact, trust, right? What's that saying? There's a true friend is somebody who's willing to bury a dead body with you, right? Friends trust each other, and they display this trust by revealing vulnerabilities and secrets, as well as by asking for help and being willing to help. And whenever there is a moment like that, it ends up creating and deepening the trust. Friendship is made of support. Friends can be sources of all kinds of support. That can be emotional, like allowing a friend to grieve or talking them up when they're feeling down. That can be physical, like gestures like pats on the back or willingness to help with physical tasks. Or financial, like a loan or picking up the tab at dinner. Friendship also usually fills some need. And I'm not saying always, but often a friend fulfills a need. It's somebody that you walk with every week. It's a person you study for a class with. Maybe it's the person who allows you access to a particular social group. And again, not every friendship, but sometimes it does. And finally, the other thing that friendships are made up of is social validation, right? Being part of the group, the act of affirming the other person's place in a particular role, in a particular group, making somebody welcome to a particular group or a particular location can be a significant moment in creating a friendship. Think about the trope of like the new kid in school. Who's the friend that they make that first day, right? The person who's going to be their ride or die. Membership in the same group is often a bond that starts people down the friendship path. And they've actually done some studies which say that social validation is actually the best predictor of whether or not people will be friends. I'm sorry if I'm missing questions. They are scrolling by furiously, and I'm trying also to get through pages and pages of info. So I will stop waffling about that. Anyway, so adult friendships require intention, they require time, they require effort. They build over time to deeper intimacy, and they usually move to casual acquaintance to friend with some disclosure, such as asking advice or venting. And there's often a kind of back and forth of this as times pass. And friendships can wax and wane, right? If anybody has been a new parent, right, you know that being a new parent can actually have a pretty big effect on your friendships, right? So you can have things like a shared ritual, like pizza or movie night with friends, is a friendship builder. Becoming friends with a bookstore clerk over time to the point where you hang out in order to have discussions of books, and then you end up going to interactions outside the bookstore. Sometimes like a weekly call to touch base after a friend has moved away. All of these are ways that this tension, this friendship building might manifest. And so some questions to ask about friendships are one is where did the time spent together come from? What are the shared experiences? Did they come together voluntarily or as a result of circumstances? Do they have any shared antagonists or any shared allies? Again, do they have those layers of in jokes, in references? Are there key phrases that they seed into communication to tip each other off? How much trust exists between them? And again, what are the moments that have built or destroyed trust? And are there deliberate acts that they've made in order to build trust? How much validation do they give each other? And what are the group dynamics? And I'm about to talk a little bit more about that because groups are very different than one-on-ones. And often a group's dynamics will reflect those of a family. Okay. All right. So with group friendships, you may want to kind of sketch out the group friendship in several ways. And you're going to want to think about what are the group dynamics? What is groups tend to have a sense of common identity, something that they're organized around, like housemates, co-workers, members of a particular study group, right? Like in community, right? They were all started because they're in the same study group, or people with a shared goal. So you want to think about some questions with all of this. You want to think about how did the group, how and why did the group emerge? Who's in it? What do they do together? How do they interact and influence each other? Is their style competitive or cooperative? Is this a group that's capable of working together or not, right? Teamwork is a thing, and teamwork is a thing that will really test a friendship, right? Get them to assemble a piece of IKEA furniture together and see what happens to the friendship. What happens when you've got internal or external problems or challenges? Are they good about sharing in resources and information? How are they perceived outside by people outside the group? Is that the in group or is that the losers club? Is that membership desirable? And who in the group holds the most prestige and who in the least? Yeah, you mentioned the three women in last season of White Lotus, a great look at complex group friendships, right? Just because people are friends doesn't mean they don't have things they don't like about each other, right? And I think that's important. No spoilers, I promise. Okay, so think about kind of what are the roles in the group, right? Who does what? Because like most groups have a clown, right? Somebody who kind of blows off tension and states the taboo. And so who's the leader of the group and who's their kind of second in command? What challenges do they face to their authority? And what's the source of their power? Is there someone who's definitely the lowest status group member of the group? And how is that expressed? Um, One of the ways that I think about this sometimes is, if this was a party of characters in a game, right? In Dungeons and Dragons, you might think of, who's the tank, who's the healer, who's the rogue? What emotional powers does each person bring? Who is the peacemaker? Who stirs up trouble? Who takes care of people? And who's the one that's like urging hedonistic risks? And I think this could be really fun to write group communications. One of the things that an exercise that I give people sometimes is to write a scene where you've got a group of four friends. They're trying to decide where to go for a meal, and each of them would prefer a different place. I think you really get a chance then to let the different personalities shine. Yeah, the Brady Bunch is a good one, right? You do get family roles come into play there. Okay. So, as I said, friendships can and usually do change over time. At a minimum, they have ups and downs. They have growing pains that establish patterns and trust, arguments and reconciliations, and they can have a long-lasting friendship with really depth and complexity to it. And yep, friendships can absolutely be intergenerational. There's no reason why they can't. Um, Sometimes couples may form couple friendships, right? Other pairs that they do things with. And it's always interesting when a person enters a romantic relationship, they may find themselves at odds with their partner's friends and then have to make friends with them as well. If you are dealing with addiction, that can often factor into friendships. Sometimes friends enable each other. Codependency is a pattern of excessive reliance on a partner, usually because of addiction in which the partner becomes dependent on feeling needed. This is usually a destructive pattern. This can be a major source of conflict if one person in the relationship is trying to break the addiction, or the friendship may weather it and become even stronger. So, things that can deepen friendships are sharing an interest or goal, working together, supporting each other through illness or loss, planning and taking trips together, regular visits, shared experiences like celebrations, sharing a secret or embarrassment, having it accepted and not betrayed, involvement with each other's families, right? In-laws, shared moments of excess or weakness. Overall, time and gestures of affection and support deepen friendships. Put that in chat. So, by the same token, some things harm friendships. Lies, betrayals, bragging, dependence, neglect, minimizing the other person's experience or expertise, not recognizing the other's emotions, competition, outside stresses, changes in values, insulting each other, and yeah, as Danielle just mentioned jealousy as well, right? So these are things that if you wanted to harm a friendship, right? And that could be the source of a story. Could be friends weathering or not weathering some sort of crisis, something that uh, causes problems. All right. You may want to think about some other kinds of friendships, friendships with animals, right? Androcles and the lion, or the raised by wolves trope, right? You don't have to have friendships, don't have to be between humans. I am friends with my cats, I would like to think. They may not think the same. You may want to think about internet or media relationships, right? One of the things that we have nowadays is what we call parasocial relationships. That's when a parasocial relationship is when there is a public figure and a fan develops an illusion of a relationship with that figure because they know intimate or self-disclosed details about the public figure. So they feel like they know a lot on their side of the friendship, and the other person is just like, I have no idea. And of course, they know a lot. They know what that person had for breakfast because they put it on Instagram. So these are kind of one-sided relationships. Another manifestation of internet relationships is, when you have friendships that are formed online, usually without the benefit of video, they're kind of friendships between constructed personalities, and those personalities may or may not resemble the person behind them. And even when a person's not misrepresenting themselves, the idea constructed in someone else's head may not be accurate, right? I think that when you are making friends with somebody online at first through text, like whenever you're reading text, you're reading a new writer, you are making a lot of assumptions about them, and they may be right and they may be wrong. Not all friendships are benign. Not all friendships are two-way. Some friendships are dysfunctional or toxic. I mentioned codependency earlier, and that can be definitely a force that encourages addiction or bad behavior and rationalizes it. A toxic friendship is one where one person is harmed rather than helped by the friendship. Toxic friends engage in behavior like telling secrets or making jokes at their friends' expense. When challenged, they deny the behavior or apologize in an insincere way. They may undermine their friends' confidence through competitiveness or belittling. They don't respect boundaries and don't hesitate to take advantage. Often they may encourage other person's worst traits. And they've also got fair weather friends, people who appear when they need something physical or tangible, but then cannot be depended to reciprocate. You can have friends like this that are narcissists, that are prone to drama. They can drain the energy from others. Somebody mentioned that earlier. And of course, I write speculative fiction, so I can make that literal, right? I can have literal energy vampires wandering around, sucking people and leaving them as dry husks. So, but generally, a narcissistic friend can be great story fodder for a writer, but overall, in person, they are exhausting to deal with. So this could be a fun thing to do is put your character in relationship with a toxic person, put them in a position where they have to break things off with a toxic person, despite the other person's best efforts. Okay. Okay. Oh my God, we got so much. I've got quite a bit more in just a little bit more time. So let me say quickly, families. You can't talk about non-romantic relationships without talking about families. And families are something almost every character has or wants to have. They're not something we choose, and sometimes they can represent the greatest obstacles that a character will face. And remember that the traditional dynamic of mom, dad, and two kids is an American media stereotype. There's many kinds of families. There's a range of cultures with different attitudes towards families. Families are extended and usually multi-generational. And so in creating a culture, you may want to think about the family dynamics specific to your characters, as well as the society that holds them. The child who represents a past crime of some sort, for example, may be treated differently than their fellows. In a world where every third child is sent off-world to join the Imperial Army, that third child may be given a smaller share of the resources. Fairy tales often hold that a seventh child of a seventh child is magical in some way. I know there have been stories written about what if you had to shoulder that expectation. Uh, One of the biggies when you're thinking about families is parent and child relationships, because the patterns that shape how people deal with others are sometimes deeply rooted in the moments of their childhood. Somebody who was spoiled as a child may have trouble forming relationships as an adult, or they may continue those patterns. Somebody who was denied affection may seek it, or they may find it impossible to understand. And so parents influence a child's basic values, attitudes towards authority, religious ideals, work ethic, and other degrees of social conformity. The better the relationship between a parent and child, usually the more influence over those values the parent will have. Children may model their behavior after a parent's own behavior, ranging from very small acts to very large. And that's particularly significant when you've got a child whose parent is an addict or abusive or some ways other skewed from the normal pattern. Children learn their coping patterns from parents. And again, right, moments that we revert to in times of stress. This may be where it comes from. The child of a parent who withholds something like affection or approval may find themselves seeking that from others for the rest of their lives, whether they realize it or not. And in thinking about a child's character's childhood and their parents, think about what are the moments of trauma? What are the wounds that their inner child carries as an adult? What are the things that wake them up in the middle of the night or that they would never tell anyone? What are the guilts and shames that haunt them? What things will they take pride in later on in life? What are the elements that they can never walk away from? What are the things that their parents taught them were worth pursuing and what things were to be ignored? Liz just mentioned healthy families don't produce many writers. I don't know that for one thing, it's the same. Was it like 110% of families are dysfunctional? I think every family has got its own particularly dynamic. And so I think mileage will vary. But families are more than just parent and child, right? There's siblings, there's parents, there's grandparents. And I think it's definitely worth figuring out where your character falls in the family and who are the people around them. Story might center on the idea that a sibling has another sibling to whom they are particularly close. Maybe they're twins or triplets. Maybe they're clones. Maybe they're bonded because one had to look out for the other during their childhood. Maybe they've been drawn together by some shared experience, particularly a secret that must be preserved at all costs. Characters may be separated at birth or somewhere in childhood and reunited much later in life. And that's a really common trope. And so there, what are the moments of shared trauma? Who's responsible for them? What are the things that meet family to them? What do they view as their responsibilities to their siblings? And along the same lines, what do they expect? Or, what responsibilities, what duties do they think those siblings owe them? Children can be adopted. They can be otherwise brought into an extended family. And sometimes childhood friends may find a second family this way. Many families have honorary relatives, close friends who are considered part of the overall family. As I said, family structures vary widely. They're usually multi-generational. Family members may include divorced parents and their partners, and step parents may bring in additional siblings, grandparents, and other steps. And so think about the family and think about some things like who tells the stories in your character's family. This is one of the places where you don't need to let it all be in the story, but you need to know it. It's a little bit like the more you know about a world, right? Your world building, only about 10% of what you know about the world ends up being in the story, but the rest of it is there kind of lurking under the surface, informing what's going on. Here, maybe 10% of it is going to go into the story, but you're going to know why it is that they're doing the things that they're doing. Um, Certainly family problems can manifest in a lot of different ways, right? There can just be addiction, there can be abuse, there can be parentification, right? Where older children are forced to become parents. Um, and so think about the family problems. Think about who does the family acknowledge not to be trustable? Who's keeping those secrets? What does the family see as its overall characteristics? What does it take pride on? What what are the ancient grudges held in the family? So there's lots of possibility there. Okay, and so since I've got just a minute or so here left, let me kind of skim just really briefly to say that you also may want to think about frenemies, right? You may want to think about enemies and or rivals. Uh, Crowley and Aziraphale, right, in Good Omens at first are frenemies. They're enemies, but they're fond of each other. And then, of course, that progresses to a romantic relationship, right? Sometimes frenemies can sort of intersect with toxic friends. And you may want to think about why, if somebody has a frenemy, what is it that they hate so much about that person? Going to want to think about rivals. Think about if you're sitting in a school setting, right? There's all sorts of rivals, right? Who's going to be the valedictorian? Who's going to be the star of the whatever team? There's also going to be bullies, right? Bullies are part of that sort of subsection of relationships. And a bully is somebody who uses force, threats, or other means to coerce or abuse somebody else. And so think about bullies are usually somebody that's learned that bullying gets them what they want, or it's somebody that has a deep insecurity or fear they're trying to comfort, or they may really envy somebody and are trying to take what they can have. And often there can be very satisfying bully redemption stories or bully getting their comeuppance. So if I were going to talk further for like another hour or so, I would talk about relationship costs. I would talk about repeated patterns in relationships. I would talk about gender and race in relationship, right? That can play a part. Talk about work relationships, academic relationships, shared interest relationships, neighbors and community. And those are all things that you can think about when you're thinking about all these side characters that appear in a story. Bob is asking if you plan on writing several books, how much of the character do you reveal in book one? Enough that the reader understands what's going on of them. Enough that the reader understands why they're doing the things that, oh yeah, and Alana is saying exactly what I am saying. So I will stop. All right. I believe we're in question time now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Kat. There's so many wonderful and ideas about relationships. And you said early on how characters are built of their relationships. And I can see, like, especially reading your books, how that's true. Like the characters and the relationships they have, the more you know about them, the more like they come to life and become real people. I mean, we meet anyone and they have all of these infinite relationships really that we will never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's part of the interest of getting to know someone, right? Is learning over time all of these details about the relationships in their own lives and how they interact with relationships. And that's so much of what makes a person fascinating, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I would hit one of these questions, like talk a little bit about race in relationships and the value of cultural differences. I think that can be really rich. And I think you want to think about race often there's situations where it's linked with social role, where there's a power dynamic, and you want to think about that. Cultural differences can lead to huge clashes, right? Think about that. We talked about the differences in love languages producing a clash. Think about if you have cultural differences. There is a novel by Mary Doria Russell called The Sparrow, which is just a killer novel, but is about a huge cultural difference. So that is definitely worth
Hmm.
thinking about. Christina's asking about relationships with the bad guy or gal. Yes, I highly encourage it. And one of the reasons that you want to do that is, um, your bad guy or gal doesn't think of themselves as the bad guy or gal, right? They think of themselves as a perfectly valid person for a relationship. Who wouldn't want to have a relationship with them? And you can have a lot of fun with that.
Oh, yeah, we have a question from PK Robbins. When you're developing satellite characters, do you spend more time daydreaming them into existence and fleshing them out than time you give them on your pages?
Oh, absolutely. They do get more time kind of in the creation than they do in sort of like story time on the page. But part of that can be writing time in that sometimes it's handy to write, say, a letter from one character to another
Hmm.
or something document they would have produced, in which case sometimes that can end up being part of the story, but often not. It's just something that helps you flesh things out.
If you were to think of, say, 100 different relationships that your protagonist has, how do you decide which ones of which of those relationships to bring into the story?
The ones that matter to them, the
Hmm.
ones that they care about the most. And those don't have to be the deepest friendships, right? They could be super, worried about impressing somebody who they don't know at all. Uh, or they could just not give a shit, right? And it's one of the kind of fun things about that. Yeah.
That's a good answer. That's helpful. We have a question from Rebecca. My side characters tend to briefly take over in their limited time on the page. Any advice?
Yes. So what happens is they've wandered into the story and they've been entertaining and you're like, oh my God, this person's so interesting and maybe they need to be the center of the story. What you have to do is savagely kneecap them by removing some of the space they have on the page. They've got so much space on the page that the reader will start thinking like, oh, they really matter. And so the more space they have on the page, the more they're going to matter. So you've got to at that point either take that out or maybe you write another story or it depends on how much you like that side character. Most of the time though, kneecap them and put them aside for another story because you can save stuff. I hate throwing writing away. So yeah.
You got to be mean sometimes, I
You
guess,
do. You
which
do.
is hard when you care about the characters.
It really is.
We have a question from Pam. How about inventing a character strictly because you need them for a plot reason? Are there any cautions there?
Yeah. Well, you don't want them to seem too Deus ex machina, right? You don't want them
Hmm.
to seem like that sort of like, oh, here's the person that walks in and saves the day. In which case, there you should, like, let's say you're writing the story and you decided like, okay, they are going to come in and save the day at the end. Well, you better go back and write them into the rest of the story. They better be an integral part of the story from the beginning, and
Mhm.
they better, have enough space that we understand that they're important.
Yeah, and do all that same work of
Mhm.
developing their relationships and thinking throughout the entire process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We have a question from Virginia. Do you document your characters' backgrounds in a profile or use an outline of their important characteristics?
Um, I don't, but I think it's really handy. It's one of those things where like I should do that.
Yeah.
Um, I think the thing that I think is handy is to keep, yeah, actually to keep a page where you're noting the dates and things that you need to remember and names that you need to remember. And that tends to be a single Scrivener page that's just marked
Hmm.
character notes, character name. And so it might be like, she was born on this particular date, or this is the name of the tailor she goes to, or whatever, anything that I want to be able to go back to and not scramble going, well, I know I provided the name of the tailor. What was that?
It's funny, some people keep notes on the relationships in their actual lives that
Yeah.
like and they're very impressive about remembering things because they carefully document these things and
Yeah.
then but that's one of those things that most people don't do in their real relationships, but I almost sometimes feel like I should.
Well, I mean, it would be handy. I'm going to Origins game convention next week and to be part of Authors Alley. And one of the things that I will try to do is every time I get a business card,
Hmm.
write how to connect, how I was why I got
Yep.
that card, and then try to connect with them later on, which would just be smarter. Oh, Susan, this is actually, so it's elephants, but it's elephants doing an erotic activity. So usually people don't notice that. You have a keen eye, but it's elephants being very friendly with each other. So I apologize if anyone is shocked by
Mm.
the pornographic elephants.
Um, we have a question from Irene. Can the protagonist give a little background info on another character as commentary?
Oh, sure. I mean, and keep it short and funny and significant. I mean, and that could be part of your character's voice. Oh, I met up with Donnie on the corner. Donnie's my best friend, but I hate him. And then kind of like a couple of lines or whatever. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the thing that's really going to show, though, to kind of the relationship between the two characters is going to be the way they talk to each other. Are they busting each other's chops? Are they being sweet? Are they, like, what are they saying? I think that is going to be one of the best places to let that play out.
I think this is an interesting question from Patrick. For short stories or novellas, do you exaggerate your character to save space or for greater impact?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I don't think that I do. Um, I might draw them in slightly better focus, in fact, than I might in
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Keep talking about what better focus means.
Okay. Um, because with a short story, you've got a lot fewer characters usually, right? You can't write a
Hmm.
short story with a cast of thousands. So I'm
Yeah.
including just a few more telling details about those characters and letting them kind of like unfold a bit more on the page than I might in a novel where, like, oh, that's just the guy on the dock and they're never going to see him again. Whereas in a short story, I might feel free to put a little bit in.
Hmm. We have a question from Martina. What would you say, how many side characters seem appropriate before a novel gets confusing?
Well, okay. I think that's a great question, and I wish I could say like 54 or something like that. But the problem is that it's going to vary a
Yeah.
lot. I think what I would do is recast the question and say that however many you have, each one needs to be distinctive from all the others. So if you're going to have 54, they need to be 54 distinct characters. And four 54 characters that have points of differences between each other.
Do you have any advice on how to introduce side characters? I know most readers have the experience of meeting a bunch of characters in a row and then forgetting all of them. Like, how do you
Oh,
avoid that when you're introducing your characters?
well, I mean, I would try to parse it out a little.
Yeah.
So, if they're at a story, I might even, like say they're at a party, I might even condense it and be like, I met a whole bunch of more people and I recognized none of the names, kept none of them.
Mhm.
And just kind of, here are the three that I remember, and then present three or something like that. I mean, it's okay to condense, like when I go to let's say if I go to church on Sunday and I'm talking to somebody, I don't say, like, oh, I went and here's a complete list of the congregation. Be like, oh yeah, I went and my friend Francisco was there and I sat with him and my friend Ann. Right. I'm just going to name
Mhm.
you.
It seems like you're talking about really like understanding the relationships of the protagonists and
Yes,
using as the avenue towards getting
absolutely.
into how you introduce the other characters.
Uh-huh.
All right. Uh, Greg asked if we'll post your notes online, and I think you are going to send the
Yes,
notes later with
I
them. And
will.
we'll share those when we send the recording. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, Claudia has a good note. Sometimes a divine detail can go a long way in
Oh,
encapsulating the depth of a
absolutely.
side character.
And that's one of the reasons why it's such a good idea to people watch. It's one of the reasons why I love traveling. I park myself on a bench and I just people watch because sometimes those little details are just amazing. Um, if you want a really interesting book, let me put Caro's big book of poker tells by Mike Caro is really interesting because he's talking about body language and how you can tell what somebody's thinking by kind of look by their body
Hmm.
language. And so that's a really fun one if you like to find those very special details.
And maybe you can win your next poker game as well if you
Yeah, well, that's
play
it. If you
poker.
can.
Not that I do. I have a few times. Um, yeah. Let's see. Some more questions. So, Mary asks, how important is it to write a short biography for each of your characters, not part of this story, but a reference to go back to?
Well, I mean, that depends on how good your memory is, right? If you're capable of keeping the details in your head, you may not need it.
Hmm.
But if it's something like I need to know, again, the name of their tutor from third grade or whatever, who was so it's such a big influence on them, then I would write that down. But and that's specifically for a novel, right? I don't think I'd do that for a short story at all. Usually a short story, I can manage to keep it all in my head.
Yeah. When you're going through the revisions process, do you ever make major changes to a character in their terms of their personality or relationships?
Oh, not in terms of their personality, sometimes in terms of what happens to them, like whether they live through the book or
Hmm.
not. I have been
Oh,
known to go either way. To the people asking about the book, the poker book is Caro's, Caro, Caro's Big Book of Poker Tells.
yeah, so we are just about out of time. Is there any last piece of advice or thoughts you want to share with everyone here today?
Um, daydreaming is crucial. And you can tell your spouse or partner this, that when you are sitting there staring off into space, you're actually working
Hmm.
super hard. And that's okay.
That's good advice. So let's all put down our phones and stare at nothing for a while, and
That's
we'll be
it.
better writers.
Yes, it is okay not to use names, Elizabeth, kind of depending on what you're trying to do. I know that's a terribly wishy-washy answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Kat, so much
Thank
for being
you.
here. Anyone who wants to learn more about Kat, you can go to katrambo.com.
Yes.
And I highly recommend Kat's series of books. The first one starting with You Sexy Thing.
Yeah.
And that is a book with a wonderful cast of characters. So if anyone has any questions for me, thoughts, feedback, etc., feel free to email me at support@authorspublish.com. And thank you everyone behind the scenes who makes these talks possible. And thank you as well to all of our supporters and our wonderful audience members and everybody who is part of the Authors Published community. And thank you again, Kat.
Oh, thank you. This was delightful.
Wonderful.
Take
Have
care.
a wonderful rest of your day, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.